Whoa, chocolate. There was a study published in Molecules that took a look at subjects that consumed 2 grams of dark chocolate compared to 2 grams of milk chocolate with close to the same amounts of sugar. They consumed 2 grams every day for 6 months, and they found the group that consumed the dark chocolate had lower levels of plasma glucose and had lower levels of what is called HOMA-IR, which is sort of their lagging indicator of insulin resistance. So does this mean that chocolate is good for insulin resistance? It may very well be so, and the benefits of dark chocolate might even possibly override the small amount of sugar that's in it. Let's dive in more. There's a study that was published in Nutrition Metabolic Insights that dove a little deeper looking at type 2 diabetics. So in this case, they gave subjects a small bar of regular dark chocolate or a bar of sugar-free chocolate. Okay, the sugar-free chocolate had erythritol, inulin, and stevia. What they found was pretty darn interesting. They found that both groups had elevated levels of blood glucose. But what they actually found that was very interesting was that the peak levels of glucose were the same between the dark chocolate that had regular sugar in it and the sugar-free chocolate, even though the sugared chocolate had a little bit more of an aggressive rise. What is this telling us? This is telling us that yes, the sugar-free chocolate is probably a better option, but it is telling us that something in the chocolate, maybe the polyphenols, maybe the flavonoids, which we'll get into in more detail, are actually overriding the sugar in the dark chocolate so that they're somewhat equal when it came down to the glucose spike. Now, what was very intriguing with this is they actually found that, once again, the sugar-free chocolate still spiked glucose, which kind of puts us down a different direction for a little bit, because that means that maybe even the sweeteners like the stevia could be triggering a cephalic insulin response, but that's a story for a different day. So let's dive into why this might be happening. Could it be polyphenols? Well, there's some interesting data with that. There was a study that took a look at subjects consuming high flavonoid chocolate, so high polyphenol content, okay, versus low flavonoid chocolate. They also had high flavonoid chocolate plus exercise and low flavonoid chocolate plus exercise. What they found is that the high flavonoid dark chocolate led to significantly better insulin resistance improvement. What in the world is going on with this? Okay, well, they also saw that there was an improvement in what is called glucagon-like peptide 1. Now, I get nerdy on this channel, that's what I do, so I'm going to break that down a little bit more. But essentially, there were all kinds of just metabolic benefits that came from the high flavonoid chocolate that didn't exist in the low flavonoid chocolate. And it's worth mentioning, yes, the exercise enhanced the effects in both groups. So to understand glucagon-like peptide 1, we look at another study published in Molecules. I know I'm rattling a lot of studies off, but I have to reinforce this because otherwise people will call BS on the claims, right? So this study took a look at subjects that consumed water, or water plus dark chocolate that had a lot of flavonoids in it. And yes, it would have sugar in it, believe it or not. And they gave this to them before what is called an oral glucose tolerance test. An oral glucose tolerance test is where they give subjects a big bolus of glucose to see how they respond to it. How's their insulin response? How's their glucose response? What they found is that the group that had the water and even the dark chocolate with a little bit of sugar had a better response than just the water itself. So they had a better response with insulin, a better response with glucose, and get this, they had increases in glucagon-like peptide 1. What on earth does this mean in simple human terms? Well, glucagon-like peptide 1 helps insulin secrete properly. Okay, so it encourages the release of insulin, which sounds bad at first if you're insulin resistant, but encouraging the acute and efficient release of insulin means that you are getting the right dose of insulin at the right time to do the job. Okay. Now they also found there was some other interesting stuff. They found that dark chocolate, the flavonoids in dark chocolate, may inhibit something called DPP4. Now I'm not going to go too much down that rabbit hole because it's not my area of expertise, but I do know that DPP4 normally inhibits gut incretins like glucagon-like peptide 1. So what I'm alluding to is maybe, just maybe, it is that inhibition that is allowing insulin to properly release. So what I'm saying in a grandiose, very colloquial, simple way is that something in the dark chocolate overrides sugar. So I actually do believe that you could have a small amount of 80 to 90% dark chocolate that has a little bit of that just not so good sugar in it, and you probably end up with a net positive. And you might be wondering, oh, it's just the fiber. Well, no, we can get into more detail with that. Also, I put a link down below for Thrive Market. They are a sponsor on this channel, not just this video. And if you're looking for different kinds of snacks or chocolates, whether they're sugar-free or not, they do have a wide variety. I don't want the net impression of this video to be, hey, go to Thrive Market and buy chocolate, but it is a pretty opportune point to mention it if you are looking for maybe better for you options that aren't just like grocery store Hershey's chocolate. So that link down below will save you 30% off your entire grocery order. Okay, so everything you order, not just a little bit of chocolate. So even if you don't want chocolate. So 30% off, plus you get a $50 free gift when you use that link that's down below. So check out Thrive Market. You get all your groceries delivered to your doorstep. Trust me, it makes life way, way easier. And it's a lot better to be able to shop looking for better for you options online when you're not super hungry and you're not making cruddy decisions in the grocery store. So anyway, that link is down below. And thank you to Thrive Market for giving us the opportunity to create the content that no one else will create by sponsoring these videos. Okay, so here's where we get wild. Nitric oxide. This is like the coolest thing. So there's some evidence that has been published that chocolate and the flavonoids in chocolate can help produce what is called nitric oxide. Now, nitric oxide you might know of from like pre-workout supplements, right? Like NO2, nitric oxide does help what's called vasodilation. Now, I want to get very simple for a second. When you think about it, vasodilation, having more blood flow, is probably a good thing for circulation and for circulating glucose throughout the body and getting into the periphery and peripheral tissues. It also might help insulin get to where it's going so that glucose isn't pooling, right? So having better blood flow and better vasodilation is good for a number of different things, okay? But the study that was published in the American Society of Hypertension did discover that the flavonoids in dark chocolate do encourage nitric oxide production and endothelial cell health, ultimately improving vasodilation, and in this particular case, improving hypertension. Now, this video isn't about hypertension. We're talking about insulin resistance. But believe it or not, insulin resistance and hypertension might actually go hand in hand. So you may not realize that one or the other are feeding into each other. So with that, we look at another study published in Circulation that correlated insulin resistance and poor nitric oxide production / endothelial function. So endothelial dysfunction is when the cells that are in the sort of arteries in the circulatory system are not functioning well and not allowing for the proper dilation and relaxation of blood vessels. If those blood vessels are stiff because the endothelial cells are dysfunctional, then you don't get good blood flow. Well, what we are now discovering is that, believe it or not, insulin, proper insulin production and function actually leads to healthy endothelial cells. Without insulin being produced properly, endothelial cells don't thrive. And insulin directly can stimulate nitric oxide production as well. Okay, so it all has to work in harmony. Insulin is not the enemy, just too much is, or being resistant to it is. So if insulin is secreted the way that it should, then what's going to happen is you're going to have more nitric oxide production, which is going to allow those endothelial cells to function better, allow vasodilation. But here's where things are wonky. So remember, insulin resistance leads to endothelial dysfunction. But guess what? Endothelial dysfunction also leads to insulin resistance. So you see how you can end up on this terrible spiral. If you become insulin resistant, what happens is insulin does not get to where it needs to go. Okay, it doesn't deliver to the cell. Okay? So what happens is then glucose pools up. And when glucose pools up, you start producing more insulin. Okay, but that insulin still isn't getting to where it needs to go because your circulation isn't good because of the endothelial dysfunction. So where does chocolate come in? Well, chocolate is sort of an intermediary. It comes in and it externally influences nitric oxide production when it might actually break this cycle. Now, I'm not saying that chocolate is magical with this, but it definitely possesses some powerful polyphenols that might just be the pattern interrupt that you need. Now, one more very interesting thing. Okay, there is a study published in the journal Preventative Medicine, and this found that dark chocolate plays a role in inflammation. Now, inflammation affects our insulin resistance as well. So when we have a lot of inflammation, then we are basically creating a static signal that makes it so that the cells cannot receive a signal from insulin. So what this study found is that when subjects had 30 grams of 84% dark chocolate per day, they saw significant reductions in C-reactive protein, reductions in tumor necrosis factor alpha 1, as well as interleukin 6. Very powerful inflammatory markers. Now, this probably has something to do with the antioxidant effect within the chocolate and the polyphenols itself, But it's very, very interesting. So at the end of the day, like, what is the protocol here? What should you think about doing? I have been a dark chocolate person forever. What I do is I grab unsweetened baking chocolate. Okay, that's that stuff that doesn't have any sweetener at all, okay? I usually melt it down and add a little bit of monk fruit myself. I don't want the erythritol, I don't want all that other stuff when I'm just looking at it as sort of an intervention, if you want to call it that. So I melt down a few ounces of it, I add some monk fruit, and then I put it in the freezer, and then it tastes good, it's nice and sweet, and then I eat about 1 or 2 ounces of that per day. It's also a good source of fats, so if I'm doing a lower carb protocol, it works very well as well. So anyhow, chocolate might just be what we're looking for. I'll see you tomorrow.